Thank you. Okay. I'm going to start here from where we left off Monday. Now, a couple things now. Most carbs are in the cyclic form, like 90% of the time, but they do open up. The reason they open up is because OCO. Okay. So we have an OCO present. That means it's going to be an acetyl, ketal, hemiacetal, hemiketal. It's got an OH present, and there's an H here as well. So that is a hemiacetal. So I'm going to put
Oh, okay.
what? Did everyone see where it was a hemiacetal? We have an OCO. We have an OH. That means it's a hemi something. We have an H there. That means it's a hemiacetal. And this is also
Oh, Serena, did I tell you that I got an apartment? Did I tell you? Okay. I'm moving in this week. Yeah, weekend. I'm like fully moving my stuff and everything.
okay.
Not much anymore. Probably be done in like a day or two. We need to get a U-Haul to move the big stuff. Probably tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay, so let's continue on here. All right, I'm going to do this with glucose instead of galactose.
I don't know, girl.
Okay, you guys need to turn off your sound, put it on mute, and do a private
I like the
chat,
place
please.
though. Yeah.
Okay.
My friend lives very close by too. My friend. Yeah. She lives in the same like apartment complex.
Are you guys done? All right, so I'm going to do a simpler example and of a hemiacetal. Okay, so when we have this, okay, that's propanol. And with an acid, I mean, with an alcohol added to that aldehyde, like ethanol, we are going to get
Careful, girl. Yesterday? What was yesterday? Was it yesterday was Tuesday? Yeah, I just called in on Monday. I was not feeling good at all, girl. Yeah. I was feeling super, super sick.
You guys do know you have an open mic. All right. So we have an aldehyde under acidic conditions with adding ethanol. We're going to get a hemiacetal. This is a two-way reaction. Okay. So a hemiacetal can be reversed and it'll form the original aldehyde and the original alcohol. Okay. If this is also a hemiacetal, we have OCO, we have an OH group, and we have a hydrogen there. Okay, that means it's going to be just like this up here. Okay, so all right. So this is how sugars that are hemiacetals, and it's very important. Some sugars are not hemiacetals. If it's a hemiacetal, I need to stress this. If it's a hemiacetal sugar, it can open up. Okay, and this is how it does it. It's a hemiacetal. Hemiacetals can go back to the original aldehyde and the original alcohol from which it was formed. A hemiacetal, once it opens up, it exposes an aldehyde. The aldehyde can be oxidized with its corresponding oxidized acid. So if we take this opened up okay, so that's the opened up glucose. We put an oxidizing agent in there, like cupric, copper nitrate. What's going to happen is that aldehyde sugar opened up is going to oxidize. And the copper plus 2 is going to be reduced to copper plus 1. And the aldehyde is going to be oxidized to the acid. Now, this is in a alkaline or basic environment, which means that this is not going to be the COOH, but the CEO minus. And that copper plus 1 is going to combine with oxygen to form cuprous oxide, which is that orange brown color. That's the Benedict's test. Now you need to know this reaction. All right. If the Benedict's test is positive, it's called a reducing sugar. So a reducing sugar forces either copper plus 2 to copper plus 1, silver plus 1 to copper or to silver metal. Okay, so reducing sugars. You have to be able to identify what is a reducing sugar. You're going to look for a hemiacetal. If there's a hemiacetal, that can open up to expose an aldehyde, which can then be oxidized to corresponding acid in basic conditions. If it can't open up, if in other words, it's not a hemiacetal, then it won't be oxidized. Hence, you'll get a negative test, for example, using the Benedict's test. So most sugars are more stable like this here. In the closed formation. In other words, the hemiacetal is more stable than the opened aldehyde version. The reason why it's more stable is because that aldehyde is very reactive. It likes to react with things. So by staying closed, it's more stable. Okay, so that is a very important reaction. And I'm going to use this a lot. You will see this reaction used a lot. In your carbohydrate lab, you're going to be using this reaction. You'll actually be doing it. And it's, unfortunately, it's down the ways, carbohydrate lab. But when we do get to that lab, you'll be doing this Benedict solution, for example. Okay, are there any questions about this? Okay, so when the ring opens, when the ring opens, it can then go either this way or that way. In other words, if it starts off being a beta glucose, it can become an alpha glucose as it goes through the opening and then reclosing of the ring. Remember, beta is when the OH goes up. Alpha is when the OH goes down. Okay. both furanose and pyranose rings, each one can go through a opening and closing. If it's an acetal, excuse me, if it's a hemiacetal. If it's a full acetal, it can't, only if it's a hemiacetal or a hemiketal. Okay, so a 5-membered ring like fructose can also open up. And there's a technicality why it can open up if it's not hemiacetal. In this case, it's a hemiketal. Yeah. Yes, you can come to the Wednesday lab. Is that the question you're asking? Okay. All right. Okay, so we have reducing sugar. Has to be a hemiacetal. Otherwise, it's not a reducing sugar. And if you've got multiple groups, we have multiple groups of monosaccharides, any of them can be a reducing sugar, as long as one of them is in the hemiacetal form. So all the monosaccharides we've talked about so far are going to be reducing sugars. I'm going to talk about which monosaccharides I'm going to hold you responsible for learning. Same with disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. Okay. Now we're going to get into the concept right now of something called a glycoside. A glycoside. Okay, so that's the anomeric carbon for glucose. We have OCO, we have an OH, and we have a hydrogen there. So that is a hemiacetal. That's why it is a yes, 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 and all three of those. Okay, so we have a hemiacetal plus an alcohol. We will form then a full-blown acetal because we have OCO. We do not have an OH present on the anomeric carbon. And we have a hydrogen there. So that is a acetal now. Now, because it can exist as an alpha or beta, it's going to be up or down. Now, in our class, if it starts off as alpha going down, you're going to form an alpha. It's going to stay an alpha linkage. We're not going to have it go up and down, okay? Okay, so the linkage formed will be called a glycosylic linkage. It's the acetal formed. Is the glycosylic linkage. Okay, it says glycosides are not reducing sugars. Why? Why does it say that? I'm going to be constantly talking about reducing sugars. What is required for it to be a reducing sugar?
They can easily oxidize, and they're typically monosaccharides.
Exactly. Okay. It can easily be oxidized. And what can be easily oxidized? What form?
Hemiacetal.
Hemiacetal. Exactly. If it's not a hemiacetal, it's not a reducing sugar because it won't open up. Because the only way it can be oxidized if it opens up. Hemiacetals opens up to an aldehyde. Boom. It can be oxidized then. Okay, acetals don't open up also once they form the glycosylic linkage. Okay, so let's.
Does that mean they can't be oxidized after becoming an acetal?
It's hard to understand you. Say again.
They can't become they can't be oxidized after becoming an acetal.
Yeah, I don't know what microphone you're using, but it's really it's hard to understand. Let's go on a little more and see if that answers your question. Okay. I'm assuming you agree with that. Okay. Excuse me. In building an RNA and DNA, sugars form partially the backbone of those RNA and DNA, long molecules. And it's these two sugars, ribose and deoxyribose, are the sugars, and they form something called an ester. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about acids and esters. But these are two important sugars that's used that way. Okay. All right. These are the structures you're going to have to know. One is glucose. It's right now in the beta form because this goes up. The alpha form, let me do it in a different color, is going to go down. So you always have two versions of these monosaccharides, alpha and beta. Beta goes up, alpha goes down. Okay, the way I remember this is after you draw your six-sided cyclic ring, this carbon here goes down and then it alternates down, up, down. Now these three here is what differs. For example, galactose has the two on the left going up. You'll see that in a second. There's another monosaccharide called mannose. We're not going to worry about that one, but it's also a 6 heterocyclic ring as well. It's a pyranose. It's involved in something called lectins, 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 and mannoses are very important for getting rid of lectins in your food. Lectins are not good for you. Okay, so glucose. All of you know about glucose if you've taken any kind of biology class. It's glucose, glucose, glucose. Most animals derive their energy sources from oxidizing glucose down to carbon dioxide and water. It's a very, very important energy source. If you see the word dextrose, blood sugar, dextrose is just another name for glucose. And the reason why they say dextrose, it has to do with that D there. Okay, galactose. Now, okay, so glucose, it's down, up, down. Galactose is instead of down, up, down, it's up, up, down. So this carbon number 4 is just goes up rather than down. Everything else is exactly the same. This is alpha. We also have a, excuse me, it's reversed. Didn't have that right up there, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay, alpha goes down, beta goes up, so you can have a beta galactose and an alpha galactose. Okay, it's a component of lactose. Lactose is a disaccharide that you're gonna have to know also, and it's a combination of galactose and glucose in a certain combination. It's also used extensively in nerve tissue, so it's an important monosaccharide. The other monosaccharide is fructose. And again, it can be, this is the alpha version. So that would be the beta hydroxy. So in other words, this group goes down, this goes up. Okay, fructose is in the news a lot, being bad for you. It's super sweet compared to sucrose, for example. It's super sweet compared to glucose, galactose. It's very, very sweet. In fact, it used to be, as I mentioned before, it used to be given to diabetics because they could use significantly less of it and get the desired level of sweetness. I'm looking at the chats now. It says hemiacetal, they can't be oxidized after they become an acetal. Correct. Acetals can't be oxidized because they don't open up to an aldehyde. Hemiacetals can be oxidized because they open up to expose an aldehyde, which are easily oxidized. So I think I interpreted your two statements correctly. Is that right? Okay, so another one you have to learn is fructose, both the alpha and beta. All right, now disaccharides. Disaccharides are two of these combinations up here. And once we start combining monosaccharides, we have a linkage, as I mentioned before. That's the glycosidic linkages, and they have to be named in a certain way. Okay, so to name them, we need to find what carbons are linking together, because we're going to link up OH groups, hydroxyl groups. So, for example, here, this is one of the disaccharides you need to know, maltose. Maltose comes from beer making. That was where it was first discovered, hence the name maltose. And it's two glucoses put together in a certain way. Okay, this is alpha. So the anomeric carbon here is alpha as it goes down. So when it combines, it has to stay down. That's why it's pointing downward here. Pointing down with alpha. So when you name this linkage, you have to say, there's two ways to do it also. You can go alpha 1, 4. Or you put the parentheses in. I like this one better, because this to me connotes the alpha applies to both, and it does not apply to both. It only applies to the one, because the OH here, to be glucose, has to go down. If it goes up, it's not glucose, it's galactose. So you don't have to specify that is alpha beta. Only the anomeric carbon can be alpha or beta, which is carbon number 1. So we're attaching an alpha linkage because the OH is going down to a carbon number 4 hydroxide. So the alpha linkage to carbon 1, anomeric carbon, we're going to carbon number 4 on the adjacent glucose. So that linkage is an alpha 1, 4 glycosylic linkage. Now the question is maltose a reducing sugar? We've already shown how glucose is a reducing sugar. Is maltose a reducing sugar?
Yes.
Correct. Why?
A lucky guess. No, isn't it? I mean, it follows the same structure as the other ones. It's also, I think, a hemiacetal. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, it's a hemiacetal. And on the end, it's still there. So the end one, the right one, can open up. So this one here, it can open up to an aldehyde. This one cannot, because it's an acetal now. We have OCO. We have no OH. And we have an H here. So it's a yes, number 1, no, number 2, yes, number 3. So this is an acetal here. Acetals cannot open up. Only hemiacetals can open up. If they can't open up, they cannot expose an aldehyde, so they cannot be oxidized. So maltose is a reducing sugar. So that hemiacetal. And this happens to be alpha maltose, because the hemiacetal anomeric carbon is pointing downward. So if you were to name this, you'd name it alpha maltose, not just plain maltose, because you can have a beta maltose as well. For example, if this was alpha glucose and beta glucose, you'd end up with a beta maltose. 2 alphas together generates an alpha maltose. You'd also get a mixture on that too. This would be a beta maltose. And here we have a hemiacetal, opens up, exposing the aldehyde, which can be then and it's reducing sugar. Lactose is another disaccharide. Okay, as you know, it comes from milk products. The longer milk products are exposed to lactose bacillus bacteria, the lactose bacillus bacteria love lactose. So cheeses that are hard, that have been aged for months and months, tend to have little lactose left because the bacteria have consumed it all. So people that are lactose intolerant, usually, unless you're really sensitive, usually can tolerate hard cheeses like Parmesan or Romano, some of those. The soft cheeses are usually not aged at all, like brie. Brie is not aged at all, so it has a lot of lactose left. So if you're lactose intolerant, you'd react poorly to brie. Okay, so lactose is made with galactose and glucose. And this happens to be alpha lactose because that is an alpha. Now look at the linkage here. The linkage starts with a beta galactose. That means the OH group from which we started has to go up. And this is, if we label these now, this is going to be carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so carbon 4 has to go down because it's glucose. It cannot go up or down. The only one that can go up or down is carbon number 1. So we're starting with the galactose unit going up, so it's a beta. And when it hooks up with carbon number 4 on the glucose, which is already down, we get this beta 1,4 glycosylic linkage. Okay. Hemiacetal, it is a reducing sugar. Because it's a hemiacetal, which can open up, exposing the aldehyde that can be oxidized to the acid. So far we've had maltose, reducing sugar, lactose, reducing sugar. Now let's talk about the third disaccharide you need to know, and that is sucrose. Now the question now is, it says here it's not a reducing sugar. That means there's no hemiacetal present. Okay, so we have OCO up here. So that is yes for number 1. Number 2, there's no OH. And there's an H here. So this is a acetal. We also have another one down here. We have OCO. No OH group. And we have a carbon here instead of the hydrogen. So this is a ketal. So no hemiacetal. No hemi anything. So it's not a reducing sugar. So this would be alpha 1, beta 2. Now in fructose, the anomeric carbon is carbon number 2. Everything else is carbon number 1. Okay. And the anomeric carbon can either be alpha or beta. And when we hydrolyze or take apart those 2 sugars, we end up with something called invert sugar, which is found in honey. So honey is sweet, not because of sucrose. Honey is sweet because of fructose in it. Okay, so we have 2 more groups to go through. That's oligosaccharides. And we also have polysaccharides. Okay, so if we go here, we continue to look at the disaccharides. Can you write the word alpha out also? Theoretically you could, but I've never seen it written out. It was rated as the Greek letter alpha. Same with the beta. Okay. All right, so we have Benedict solution. Benedict solution has a real pretty copper +2. And then we have maltose, sucrose, and lactose. So we have maltose. That doesn't look like maltose. We have maltose, which, if you remember, the right-hand glucose is a hemiacetal. Sucrose, composed of glucose and fructose, have only acetals and ketals, so there's no hemiacetal present. And then we have lactose, which is galactase and glucose. And the glucose on the right side is has a hemiacetal present. So theoretically then, if we put this solution here in the maltose, it's going to be oxidized, the maltose. If we put it in the sucrose, nothing's going to happen because there's no hemiacetal present. If we put it in the lactose, it's going to be oxidized because the glucose is a hemiacetal, which opens up. So we should get orange, orange, blue. Blue means nothing happens. Orange, blue, orange. Okay, so this was oxidized, oxidized, no reaction. So these are the 3 disaccharides you need to know. They all contain 2 glucose units, and they all contain glucose and something else, either another glucose or galactose or glucose, or fructose. And you need to know the linkages as well. And draw them. Now, if you look at the worksheets I posted on Canvas, you'll have a lot of little problems practicing this stuff. Okay, we're not going to do polysaccharides or oligosaccharides today. I want to go over some examples. Let's go back up here to monosaccharide. Let's work with monosaccharides first. Okay, so you need to be able to take this guy apart, whether it's galactose or glucose. Let's work with galactose this time. What does it look like when it opens up? Okay, because it's a hemiacetal, we have OCO, so that's yes. There's an OH present, yes, and there's a hydrogen, so that means it's hemiacetal. We have 3 S's in a row there, okay? So what do we mean by the 1, 2, 3 is question number 1. OCO, yes. That would be yes. There's a hydroxide present. Hydrogen present. Yes. That's where I got the 1, 2, 3. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, cool. Okay, so this galactose now is opening up. So now it can become oxidized if we have something that is let's do silver this time. It's in a basic environment. So the aldehyde there being oxidized goes to the acid. Because it's in a basic environment, the H is no longer there. And we get a reduced silver. So the aldehyde is being oxidized to the acid. When something is oxidized, it's got to be reduced. So the reduction is taking place on the silver. Okay, you to practice this reaction a lot. You need to know. Let me finish this out. And I haven't looked at the carbohydrate wet lab real closely, but this reaction frequently is done, as well as the Benedict's. This takes a while. The Benedict's is almost instantaneous. Benedict's happens within seconds. This takes minutes. And it's kind of cool. Do this in a test tube. This ends up being all silver. In fact, this is the way they fix antique mirrors that are chipped. Antique mirrors used to have silver plating on the back of the glass for reflective properties. And over time, the silver will chip for various things. Anyway, this is the reaction they would use to create the silver metal to fix the issue, which is usually chipped. If it's chipped, there's no silver reflection then, because there's no silver there left anymore. And by doing this, you can put the silver back on. Works pretty well. Now, if we had Benedict's, copper +2, the only difference the copper would go to +1, +2 to +1. The structure of the sugar would be exactly the same thing. Opens up, expose the aldehyde, aldehydes get oxidized to the acid over here. And it wouldn't be copper +1, it would be bound up with oxygen, so it's like that. Oops, yeah, it looks like that. And this is the orange, kind of rusty color. Okay, are there any questions about this guy? This is a really important reaction. You will see this reaction used in this unit 2 a lot. So on a test, I would expect you to start with this, show it opening up, and then the oxidation and the reduction going on over here. And every one of them the same. The hemiacetal can open up, goes the aldehyde, boom, gets oxidized to the acid. Oh, one other thing too. Okay, once it opens up, it's neither alpha or beta. So both of them will yield the same open structure. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's do a disaccharide. Okay, so let's start with maltose. And um, And this was an alpha maltose. So it's alpha maltose. Okay, so this is alpha maltose. Okay, maltose is two glucoses. So we have glucose, glucose. And this has to be the left one, alpha glucose. No exceptions. The right one can be alpha or beta. But the left one has to be alpha. So this has to be an alpha 1 for linkage. Can't be beta 1. Okay, so let's undergo Benedict's reaction. So what's going to happen now, because the right-hand one, the right-handed glucose is a hemiacetal right here. It's going to open up now. Oops. Okay, so this is the hemiacetal. This is the acetal here. That's the acetal. Hemiacetal. Now you need to be able to spot these acetals versus hemiacetals, because that's going to determine whether it's going to open up or not. Okay, so let's make this a little smaller, leave some room. And then let's add some Benedict solution. And that basic environment. So what's going to happen is this guy's going to the acid. So we need more room here, right? So this is the acid form. And the copper 2 goes to copper 1. Okay, that was a pretty involved reaction. Start with maltose. Maltose is a reducing sugar, so it has one of the pieces can open up into a hemiacetal. That then creates the aldehyde. The aldehyde undergoes oxidation. Backwards. When the aldehyde undergoes oxidation to the acid, copper plus 2 reduces to the copper plus 1, forming ferrous oxide. So this is blue. And this is orange. Okay, what do you guys think about this? Okay, let's talk about fructose a little bit. Fructose is a furanose, because it's a five-membered heterocyclic ring. It's still a hexose though, because that's six carbons. It's just that the ring is formed from carbon number 2, the anomeric carbon there. Okay, when it opens up, if I asked you on a test, is this a reducing sugar? What would you answer?
Um, there is no H, but there is no H attached to the group, right? So it wouldn't be.
Correct. Correct. So this is a hemiketal because there's no H. And this is a special circumstance. So if you did a Benedict's test on this, you'd get a positive test. And you're going positive test means that there was a hemiacetal present. So what fructose can do is it can actually act like glucose because it's a special circumstance. And so what the answer on the test should be, no, there's no hemiacetal. But in reality, this forms a, because of this relationship here, you know, hydroxyl groups on both carbons. There's an intermediate product it can form, which then goes to the hemiacetal, which can then open up. But as far as our class is concerned, this is not reducing sugar. Okay. And you were absolutely right, your answer. But if we're in the lab and we throw in some Benedict solution, we're going to end up with an orange positive test. And it's because of that weird exception. And if you go back and look at the slides from the slides from the aldehyde ketone in the Benedict solution, you'll see the two exceptions. And then fructose falls within that. Okay. All right, so let's look at fructose here. And what does that look like when it opens up? Hemiketals can open up as well as hemiacetals. It's just that it doesn't expose the aldehyde, it exposes a ketone. And as you know, ketones cannot be oxidized. So what does it look like? All right, so we have okay, so we have OCO. And remember, this is carbon number 2 for fructose. That's the anomeric carbon. we put Benedict solution in with that. On paper, we'll get no reaction. But we'll get a reaction because of the relationship. If a ketone has an alpha hydroxyl group on either side of it, it can form an aldehyde. It'll rearrange itself into an aldehyde, and then form an oxidized aldehyde. But as far as our class is concerned, that's an exception that we may or may not talk about during the carbohydrate wet lab, depending on whether they have fructose as a possible reactant. Okay, so because it's a ketone, ketones cannot be oxidized, hence you'd have no reaction to this. Okay, I also want you responsible for having a simple aldehyde reaction in Benedict solution, in the silver solution as well. So let me go over a couple of those. I think that'll be it for today. Let's see, let's do a room here. So, this is an aldehyde Benedict test. Let's take a simple aldehyde. Aldehydes are susceptible to oxidation, and means we end up forming the acid. And because it's an alkaline environment, you're going to end up with the salt of the acid. Now, this reaction you should be able to also be able to do using a simple aldehyde. Better. Okay. And then we can do the same thing if we had silver. So we're going to go to silver metal. And then the aldehyde would also be oxidized to the acid salt. Okay, so we've had a ton of reactions today. A ton. What I'd like to do is, are there any questions before I'm going to show you the worksheets and stuff in Canvas. Are there any questions about what we've done today? And I know it's a lot. I really, but carbs are the reactions are the same as aldehydes, ketones. It's just that the structures make it more complicated. Okay, if we go over to okay, here's wet lab. Where is wet lab? I just uploaded wet lab. Yeah, right there. Okay, so for those of you who still can't buy the lab packet, here's lab 5 for you. And I still need to add the slides for acids and lipids. And here are the additional worksheets I put in there for aldehydes, ketones, carbohydrates, acids, esters, lipids. Now we get into lipids. We first are going to study alcohols, organic alcohols. Then we're going to do something, if you have an alcohol and an acid together, we form something called an ester. And that's the basis of lipid chemistry, is the formation of esters. Okay, so anyway, here are the worksheets for Unit 2. All right, so all your tests are graded as you've seen. I think there are 2 left for the people that, there are 2 that because of illness had to take it test later. But anyway, I'll be passing this on in lab today. And if you are in Monday lab, you can stop by and pick up your test if you'd like. All right, what I wanted to cover today. Are there any thing you want to bring up?
For the Monday lab group, could you pass out our tests next week as well? Like on Monday during the lab time? Because like some people commute and I don't think I would be able to make it here today just to pick up my test, but I would still like to see it next week if it's possible.
I'll have them with me. Is that what you mean for Monday?
Yeah, from Monday next week, so we can see it as well.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I just wanted
Oh,
those people that were really anxious to Monday folks that wanted to see it sooner. I'll have them there today as well.
okay, thank you, makes sense.
So they'll be in my pack, not a problem at all. And by the way, on the tests now, any that you feel like that you got wrong in the way I scored it, please talk to me. I want to, if you interpret the question differently than I intended, and it was a legitimate interpretation, I'll be glad to give you the points for it. Not a problem at all. So don't be shy about saying, well, I really think I needed more points in this. Anyway, okay. All right, I want you to start thinking about your project too. If you have any ideas you're thinking about, run them by me. If you see a poster that's under the that I've already posted as an example, and you know, if it's already done, you don't have to ask me whether you can do it or not. But if there's something that you know you've been thinking about, this kind of off the wall chemistry, and you like to kind of try, run it by me. It's fine. Okay. We have some holidays coming up. The next holiday is Veterans Day. It's not till November, but that would be a good weekend to knock that project out or sooner. It's due anytime before the end of the semester. If you want to do it this weekend, that's fine. I won't be able to well, I can grade it actually too. Never mind. So you can do it anytime. All right. Okay, so those of you who have lab today, remember to bring an orange. We're going to work in groups of 4-ish. The lab setup is quite extensive. Yesterday's lab, we had some Monday's lab, we had some issues with the oranges that took a lot longer than anticipated. Plus, we did a drawer check-in inventory, which we're not going to do today. You didn't need any stuff out of your drawer. It just took up extra time since this is a super long lab. So what we're going to do today is just do the lab. Okay. All right. Any last minute questions? Okay, so I will then see Wednesday lab folks in a little while.
Professor,
Yes,
did you tell us to print out a specific chart for this chapter?
it's actually, you mean like the flow chart?
I think so. I just remember you telling us to print out something, like a chart, different chart. Yeah,
Um, this one here,
I think I already printed that one out.
right? I'm gonna have one of these for unit 2. In fact, I'm
Oh,
gonna, I've got to modify the unit 2 reactions because it's gonna be a combination of unit 2 and unit 3 when I had a 5-unit class. But I'll post that as well. Hopefully I'll get it done today. Otherwise, I'll have to do it tonight.
okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. All right, you guys, take care.